Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with Maduro and his wife's court appearance today in Manhattan, in which he pled not guilty and claimed he was a victim of a kidnapping and is a prisoner of war. Joining us is an expert on guerrilla war and terrorism to discuss his warning he wrote on X that, quote, Venezuela is primed for resistance to U.S. controlling the oil. Perfect terrain for insurgency. Plenty of armed groups already. Far worse than Iraq. Chaos is coming. Robert Pape is a professor of political science and the director of the Chicago Project on Security and Terrorism at the University of Chicago, specializing in political violence and international security affairs. He's the author of Cutting the Fuse, The Explosion of Global Suicide Terrorism and How to Stop It, Dying to Win, The Strategic Logic of Suicide Terrorism, and Bombing to Win, Air Power and Coercion in War. Then we'll examine whether Trump, who clearly does not believe in democracy, is swapping one dictator for another in Venezuela, and speak with Jacob Heilbrunn, the editor at The National Interest and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and a columnist for The Spectator. His books include They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons, and America Last, the right's century-long romance with foreign dictators. He's also editor-at-large of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. Then finally we'll speak with Adele, an independent journalist and longtime chronicler of the right wing of U.S. politics, a winner of the Heilbrunn Prize in Opinion and Analysis Journalism. Her work has appeared in Mother Jones, The Nation, and The American Prospect, as well as on the op-ed pages of the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. And with Trump planning to start construction in 2 months on his latest monument to himself, the Arc de Triomphe, at Arlington National Cemetery, we will discuss her latest article at the New Republic, How Jazz Great Chuck Red Gave American Culture a Gift This Christmas. And before we begin at the start of this new year, which will culminate in the fateful midterm elections in November, polls already indicate MAGA Republicans will lose the House and possibly the Senate. But we're up against a Trump-Miller presidency already drunk with power, and they will do anything to stay in power, having already demonstrated their contempt for the United States Constitution with Trump's January 6, 2001 coup attempt. They see over half of the country as their enemy and have a private army of loyal thugs ready to round up critics of the regime they label as communist lunatics. As Trump cowers, the media and his cronies buy up the mainstream press, Background Briefing will continue to expose this malevolent regime's fascistic machinations, providing a daily insight into the news as a massive coalition of people power is mobilized to bring about an end to this nightmare and usher in a new era of reform not seen since Nixon departed the presidency in disgrace. To help save America's 250-year-old democracy, we need all hands on deck, and you can make a tax-deductible donation to help us do our part at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org. And thank you. And joining us now, Robert Pape, a professor of political science and the director of the Chicago Project on Security and Terrorism at the University of Chicago, specializing in political violence and international security affairs. Welcome to Background Briefing, Robert Pape.
Thank you very much, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And today, former president of Venezuela, Maduro, and his wife appeared in Manhattan federal court. He pled not guilty and claimed he is a victim of kidnapping and is a prisoner of war. But you have warned on X, Robert, that, quote, Venezuela is primed for resistance to U.S. controlling the oil. Perfect terrain for insurgency. Plenty of armed groups already. Far worse than Iraq. Chaos is coming. So does that mean that either Trump and Rubio have learned from our experience in Iraq and don't want to demobilize the entire Venezuelan army as George W. Bush did, and of course the unemployed Iraqi army then became the resistance against the United States? So do you think that they don't want to repeat that mistake, or are they simply blundering in and riding high on their own kind of success?
I think it's really hard to know what is in their minds at the moment. I think we don't really need to even go there, Ian, because President Trump has himself been blisteringly clear about U.S. motives and what his goals are. And the Armada itself, these 30 ships, their size, the force size tells a clear picture. And as you just said, I've been studying regime change for 30 years. I taught for the U.S. Air Force conventional targeting strategy. I've advised every White House since 9/11, including the first Trump administration, not this second Trump administration. And what we have here is a pretty clear picture. President Trump has said with completely audaciously and explicitly, this is 100% about the oil. And notice he's not talking at all about drugs or any international law or anything like that. This is not about democracy building. This is about America, Trump seizing the oil and controlling the oil proceeds, as he said, from his own White House. That's what he meant by pointing the people behind him. That's what he's talking about here. The armada that he has built, these 30 ships, they also have, notice, 10,000 Marines. They have thousands of Marines on there. Now, why would you do that? This is way too small a number to control a city like Caracas or 25 to 30 million people in the country of Venezuela. This is the size of the force you would need if you want to put boots on the ground to control the oil fields. That's what I saw coming, and I've been watching this for weeks, and that's why I'm really, I didn't know that Saturday was going to happen, but now that this is clearly about oil, it's always been about oil. But the big question is, can he do it? Can you actually do this? We are the strongest military on the planet, but we are up against a challenge here in Venezuela like we really haven't seen here before. This is not Iraq where there's all this open sand and we're going to be able to, it's going to be a turkey shoot when we shoot the Republican Guard and so forth and so on. And this is about the oil. This is about the oil. Venezuela is, as you said, as from my tweet, primed for guerrilla resistance. What's the number one issue with guerrilla resistance? Terrain. And it's favorable terrain for the guerrillas to hide and then shoot when they want to. Well, if you look at Venezuela, it's got the jungles of Vietnam. It's got the mountains of Afghanistan combined in the same country. This is perfect terrain for guerrillas to operate. There are already collectivos, groups that are pro-government militias already operating that essentially do the bad work, the dirty work for the Maduro regime. There's already these militia groups in the country, and there's already a big hunk of the population that doesn't like this, and that's likely to grow over time because they're not likely to see any proceeds of this oil. They're way down on the totem pole. President Trump said, first and foremost, we got to pay off the operation, meaning the $1 billion that it costs to do this snatch and grab. Then it comes the oil companies. If there's anybody, if the population of Venezuela is on the list, they're at the bottom of the totem pole. They're not at the top. So what this means is you have a situation ripe for insurgency. I don't think Trump's ever controlling a barrel of that oil.
Well, at his press conference on Saturday, Trump did ramble on about, of course, as you point out, he talked so much about the oil, and there was a clear disconnect saying the Venezuelan people would finally benefit from the revenues, but the priority was to give it over to the big oil companies who he claims had it stolen from them, which is not, of course, true. But he did say in a kind of incoherent way, well, oil is kind of dangerous, it's kind of explosive, and that's when he talked about the need to take care of it. So is that what the plan is then, to put American boots on the ground so that nobody can blow up these derricks?
It's not about protecting the oil, Ian. Here, the problem for America now is we're not trying to protect the oil. We're trying to pump the oil out of the ground, a la the series Landman that many of your viewers will be familiar with. And that requires civilian contractors to go in, pump these wells, have this shipped through pipelines, have this then offloaded onto ships and have the transit. And then we get the profits. The profits are dictated where they go by the White House here. We're trying to profit off of this, and we're not trying to just protect it. It's not like there's some force from, say, Colombia that's coming in to try to threaten the oil fields here, and we're protecting it. The bottom line is we're not trying to protect. We are predators here. We're taking the oil and we're trying to control the money for ourselves. And that black gold, there's a lot of groups in Venezuela that aren't going to want that to happen. This oil is well known as the curse, it's called the oil curse. Your listeners can go Google that. You'll see lots of academic articles about how this creates all the seeds for all these internal civil wars and all these problems. Oil is a curse for most of these countries, and it's going to become a curse for America as well.
Well, I suppose it's been a curse for Venezuela, not in the sense that before Chavez took over, Venezuela was the richest country in South America, and now it's among the poorest. So the whole oil patch has been woefully mismanaged, and it's clearly pretty decrepit. But that doesn't mean that the average Venezuelan doesn't consider the oil their national treasure, and that they deserve a piece of it, you know?
Without a doubt, Ian. The Venezuelans aren't going to listen to this argument that somehow American oil companies own the Venezuelan oil. No, they may have been robbing Venezuela before, but they're not going to see this as somehow justifiably American oil. And President Trump isn't even trying to make a legal case about that, because that would just collapse in a heartbeat. There's no international law here that he's resting on. This is the law of the jungle. He's taking it with power. This is power makes right, might makes right. And he's being completely foursquare about this. You don't like it? He's making an offer you can't refuse. He's got B2s ready to put your name on it. So this is very, very serious stuff. And the Venezuelans here, they're really going to be between a rock and a hard place, because the fundamental fact is they're not going to want to give this oil up. And there's lots of people inside the country that are going to be willing to take risks to keep that oil or pieces of it. And that's a big part of the reason why the country has all these great riches, but doesn't have a lot of productive wealth the way it did over time. Because what you have is, with the oil curse, people want to plunder. And then in that plundering, they make everybody worse off. It's, in political science speak, a giant collective action problem. But we've known about this for years, and Trump is not going to solve this problem here. I don't think we're ever going to see a barrel's worth of oil's money here coming out of this. There's going to be way too much resistance, willingness to shoot those civilian contractors if they go in.
So what do you think is going on then, Robert, with Rubio's discussions with the vice president who was just sworn in today, Delcy Rodriguez? On the one hand, Rubio said at the Saturday press conference that he's had very productive conversations with her, and basically, she obviously didn't want to go the way that Maduro went, so I'm sure she was quite compliant in the conversation that took place after Maduro her boss had been snatched. But then she went on national television and decried U.S. imperialism. And then subsequently today, we're learning that she's being more accommodating. So is she playing a kind of game, saying one thing to her people and another to the Americans?
I think she's trying to stay alive day by day, hour by hour. So she's really between a rock and the hard place. President Trump on Air Force One directly threatened to assassinate her if she does not do his bidding, said it will be worse for her than for Maduro, and that means assassination. The problem she has is doing Trump's bidding just opens the door for her to be killed from other people inside of Caracas. That could be the military, that could be intelligence agencies, that could be other oil cronies and so forth inside of the Maduro government. The Maduro government here is, we know quite a bit about how these dictatorships hold. And there's another, I use the word the oil curse. Well, there's another motto in political science about dead dictators produce rioting mobs. Your listeners can go and Google that, and they'll find a whole bunch of stuff on that. And what that is all about is when you take out the dictator himself or herself, what happens is you, like a mafia family, the rest of the family starts to squabble among themselves, much like the movie The Godfather. And so what you end up with is all the little centers here start to compete and stab each other in the back. And the last thing that's going to go down well is for her to start truly doing what Trump says. So she may avoid a B2 tonight, only to wake up in the next day and her own bodyguards are after her. So this is really quite a very, very touchy situation for her. And only she will be able to know how best to navigate all the different threats that she's dealing with. But there is no safe haven for her by being America's dictator now. This is going to be quite a dicey situation for Venezuela, this group inside of the current government here, for quite some time to come. And I don't think Trump is going to be able to stand very long and have Venezuela not show some signs. How is he going to actually demonstrate real productive effort here a month from now? Is this going to look like a month from now when we're saying, okay, President Trump, it's been a month. What have we gotten from all of this? This is going to the pressure here is going to start to build fast on all sides.
Well, today we're learning from an Ipsos Reuters poll that Trump's approval rating have risen to 42%, but at the same time, 1 in 3 Americans approve of U.S. military strike in Venezuela. And 72% of Americans worry that the U.S. will become too involved in the country. So already the American people are echoing a lot of what you're saying, Robert.
And not just the American people overall, but MAGA. So to have 72% here being concerned, that means at most 28% are not, which means you already have a split 2/3, 1/3 in MAGA itself in that 42% number. So what you are seeing, Ian, just in those numbers is already the signs of division. And again, we're just at the best days. The best days for the occupations that we have had. We have had regime change as occupations for decades. I've studied them. I've been advising about this for decades and decades. And the best day is always the first day. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse from there because the benefits don't show up. And that's the big problem here with this operation. There's a giant hole in the middle of this operation, which is going to become a bigger problem over time, leaking more and more support, which is there's not going to be, for months and months and months, if ever, and I'm saying probably not ever, money coming out of this oil that Trump is going to be able to redirect to pay off people. And the farmers in Iowa are going to start to squabble. Where's mine? You're going to find lots of folks in MAGA that are going to look at this and say, we just paid $1 billion to get this guy in New York. What are we getting for it?
Well, it is, I think, having studied the military so much, Robert, you would agree that Trump is all about tactics and completely devoid of strategy. And he is, of course, a reality TV guy. And this is just one episode of reality TV. And he hasn't really thought it through. And he doesn't think it through. Look, if you go back to his first term, with Kim Jong-un. They were just photo ops. Nothing ever came out of it. All the peace deals that he's made that he claims he deserves a Nobel Prize for, 8 peace deals, they're all pretty shaky. There's no follow-on in this administration because there is no structures. There is no national security structure left.
Ian, you are quite right. I completely agree with you. And what you mean by that nothing coming out of it is no benefits coming out of it. But what is coming out of this is the normalization of violence. When Trump was asked on Air Force One whether he would send the military into Colombia, without batting an eye, he said, "Sounds good to me." And we now are just, no one's going to be surprised. That's why Colombia has put 30,000 troops on its border with Venezuela. They don't know what's coming next from President Trump. And that's a problem not just overseas in the Western Hemisphere, Ian, but we've got to be very careful and not get too relieved that Operation Midway Blitz and the whole idea of sending the Guard into liberal cities is over somehow. Here, I think this is just a very, very bad thing to be very worried about. We should not become complacent here for a moment. And what I've been telling the leaders in Chicago and Illinois, and I think Governor Newsom should do this as well, is tomorrow, the governor should declare publicly there should be a 3-month moratorium in the fall, no federal militarized agents here during the 3 months around the election. And it's not because there's any sign that he's about to restart this at the moment. In fact, with the Supreme Court recent decision, you might say, oh, not a problem anymore. I think this is a bad mistake. I think that we need to understand that President Trump said he's coming back. And I think we need to start taking him at his word because he is doing violence when he says he's going to do violence. And for us, the most precious asset we have is our election. And I'm sure folks in Governor Newsom's entourage will say, oh, no, we shouldn't announce that because Professor Pape, that'll make it easier for him to do something before the election. Well, the problem is the election is what's going to really matter here. So we need to take steps now. And I think we need to declare, and the governors should start to declare, there should be a hands-off policy 3 months around the election, no federal militarized agents anywhere near these liberal states, these liberal cities during the election, because this is ripe for trouble as well.
Well, Robert Pape, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Robert Pape, who's a professor of political science and the director of the Chicago Project on Security and Terrorism at the University of Chicago, specializing in political violence and international security affairs. He's the author of Cutting the Fuse, The Explosion of Global Suicide Terrorism and How to Stop It, Dying to Win, The Strategic Logic of Suicide Terrorism, and Bombing to Win, Air Power and Coercion in War. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back examining whether Trump, who clearly does not believe in democracy, is swapping one dictator for another in Venezuela.
Take all the leaders from around the world, put them together in a great big ring, televise it as the lowest show on earth, and let them fight like hell to see who's king. Oh, hey, gather up the pieces when the fight is done, then you'll find out living really can be fun.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Jacob Heilbrunn, the editor of The National Interest and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and a columnist for The Spectator. His books include They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons, and America Lost, The Right's Century-Long Romance with Foreign Dictators. And he's also editor-at-large of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jacob Heilbrunn.
Thanks, Ian.
So in terms of our long romance with foreign dictators, it looks like in Venezuela we're swapping one dictator for another, and Trump's thrown his lot in with Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, who was even more of an ideologue than Maduro, who was basically a pretty stupid guy that Chavez chose because he was a stupid guy. You don't want a smart vice president. So I don't know whether this thing's going to work or not, is it? To have no boots on the ground and require that you just swap one dictator for another and forget about democracy. I mean, he's given the Nobel laureate who won the last election, hands down by 2/3 vote, he's given her the back of his hand. But this shouldn't be a surprise, Jacob. Since when has Trump cared about democracy? He tried a coup against American democracy on January the 6th of 2021.
It's not simply that he doesn't care about it. He's opposed to it. He wants to set up his own authoritarian regime here in the United States. And the Trump administration has concocted a series of fig leaves. You recall they said it was about drug smuggling. Then they said it was about elections. Then Trump came in and swept it all away and told the truth, which is that this is a form of petro-imperialism. He's interested in the oil. He said that when we invaded Iraq, that we should have seized the oil. He has this fantasy that you can turn on the spigots overnight and dominate the world oil markets by controlling Venezuela, which has apparently 17% of the world's reserves. What Trump has not fully taken into account is that he has potentially unleashed chaos in Venezuela. And American oil companies show no eagerness to invest there, even as he's prodding them to do so.
Well, one of the ways that Maduro kept in power and thwarted the election results was he used these colectivos, which are the hardcore supporters of Chavez and later Maduro, who we armed, and they run wild. And Venezuela has the highest murder rate in the world, I believe. So it's not exactly a country that you can just leave alone and somehow hope it works out. But isn't this really about Trump being this reality TV show guy? That he only does these sort of one-off photo ops or hits like he did. I mean, he loved watching the live TV of grabbing Maduro in his pajamas and hauling him off to New York. He did the same back in his first term with Kim Jong-un. He had a love affair with him, but they were absolutely worthless photo ops. Nothing ever came. This guy's incapable of follow-on. He doesn't understand. He thinks that he's already solved 8 wars and he's brought about peace and should have a Nobel Peace Prize. But he hasn't solved 8 wars. He's just had a few photo ops and a few conversations with world leaders. But there's no staffing. There's no follow-on. This is a complete joke. This is a administration that's run like The Apprentice, with Trump in the driving seat and turning all of his close aides against each other and creating chaos.
But it is fully synonymous with his desire to appear as an imperial president. The triumphal arch that he plans to build in Washington, takeover of the Kennedy Center, construction of a lavish ballroom for $400 or $500 million that's supposed to eclipse the White House. Now the danger is that even if it does have elements of opera buffet in Venezuela, he has unleashed forces that he may not be able to fully contain.
Well, he certainly unleashed Putin and Xi, because already on Chinese social media, they're all, writing in saying Trump doesn't care about international law, so why should we? Let's grab the leader of Taiwan.
Absolutely. I mean, Trump may not rest here. I mean, it is, he is on a sugar high, as it were. And he's talking about going into Colombia, seizing Greenland. I mean, the man has been emboldened and enabled by the junta that is around him. He is now we're learning that Stephen Miller is supposed to run the Venezuela operation, that he's supposed to become the viceroy, as it were, of Venezuela. None of this bodes well. At the same time, he says he's going to keep this armada that he's assembled off of the coast of Venezuela. 25% of American naval capacity is going to be perched there for months. And he claims that he's going to do a second and larger strike if they defy him. I don't think any of it bodes well.
Well, Stephen Miller is the co-president and has been, and now that Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, have been sidelined, he has even more influence. There's no stopping him. Obviously, Susie Wiles brought in Marco Rubio. Their relationship goes way back in Florida. They've known each other for a long time and been close. But I don't know, what do you think about the extent to which we should call this administration the Trump-Miller administration? There's no J.D. Vance in the mix.
No, there is a lot of Miller, but at the same time, I wouldn't underestimate Marco Rubio. If you watched the press conference in Mar-a-Lago the morning of this kidnapping or coup, whatever you want to call it, regime change, Marco Rubio really dominated the podium. And this whole venture is his brainchild. As the Wall Street Journal editorial page a couple of weeks ago called for attacking Venezuela and then targeting Cuba. And that, to me, is Rubio's game plan. He seems to me to be the most intelligent operator in the administration, and he's gained the trust of Trump. Fascinating that J.D. Vance, who represents the America First wing of the Republican Party, was not in Mar-a-Lago and has not really publicly embraced this operation.
Well, this is, again, which is why I'm talking to you, Jacob, apropos your book, They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons, that the neocons are back, and you've always argued that they never left. And Marco Rubio is certainly a neocon. And it's interesting, for some time now, for many years, I was told that Cuba is the tail that wags the dog of Venezuela, which is pretty strange given Cuba is basically a failed state. But going back to Chavez, because of his devotion to Castro, they installed Cuban intelligence officials both in the military to keep the military loyal and also as the Praetorian Guard to protect the leadership. And in the American raid that just took place early morning on Saturday, the Cubans were the casualties. They shot up and killed 32. At least the Cuban government has admitted 32 of its intelligence operatives have been killed. So the next step will be to cut off oil altogether. The oil flow from Venezuela to Cuba was massive and excessive, and Cuba was able to re-export the surplus and make money. So they had a very generous deal. But then when they cut that back recently, because Venezuela was so desperate to sell its oil to paying customers, Pemex in Mexico stepped in. But then recently the Trump administration squeezed Pemex and the new Mexican president into stopping that flow. So they're going to cut off the oil to Cuba, which means that they'll have no electricity. So the writing's on the wall that this is what the plan is. And maybe as far as Rubio goes, this was always the plan. He doesn't care about Venezuela. He wants revenge on Cuba.
He does, but what are they going to do when the refugee flows start again? When tens of thousands of Cubans start fleeing the island from Miami?
Well, they'll join their brethren, I guess. I mean, it happened before. I don't know. I mean, how can that government hold on? I mean, it's the same situation in Iran.
We shall see if the administration really can successfully stop the oil from leaving Venezuela. Right now, apparently 16 tankers just left and are on the lam trying to evade American military forces. So I think it's very much up in the air. I mean, if you look at it coldly, nothing has really changed except, as you alluded at the beginning of our conversation, one despot has been replaced by another incipient despot. The regime remains intact in Venezuela. Trump is banking on the notion that he can convert it into a pliant puppet, but that is highly questionable.
Well, speaking of neocons, I was just reading a piece by Ann Applebaum at The Atlantic, Trump's American dominance may leave us with nothing. And she refers to George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984, where there were three spheres of influence: Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia. And that is essentially what these three gangsters running the world, or trying to run the world, Trump, Xi, and Putin, are all about. Xi dominates Asia, Putin dominates Europe, and Trump dominates the Western Hemisphere. And she also refers to a 2019 testimony that Fiona Hill of the National Security Council gave to the House, where she said that Russia is pushing Trump to do a swap of Venezuela, their closest Latin American ally, for Ukraine. So I know Fiona well, and I'm pretty sure she's on the money there. Is that what's going on?
Well, there is that in the air. Fortunately, I think Trump's hands on Ukraine, I don't think he has a free hand, because Europe is paying for the weaponry and is upping its deliveries to Ukraine. So I don't think Trump can exert executive fiat over the destiny of Ukraine. The real issue is, as Anne points out, is what's the big whoop about controlling the Western Hemisphere? Trump thinks that America was at its peak in 1900, and he's trying to revert to the McKinley era. Our country enjoyed far less prosperity and influence in 1900 than it does today. Why does he want to shrink American power and prosperity? Our economy has been powered by trade with Europe and Asia, not with Central and Latin America.
Well, no, in terms of dividing up the world into the three dystopian segments that George Orwell wrote about, Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia, we got the worst of the deal, didn't we? I mean, unless, of course, he gets Greenland and Canada and, Panama and everything else. But even that is not anything like the rising giant in Asia, China's grab. And Putin is, of course, a failed state, or he's failing his own state, which he's looting. And Tusk, the president of Poland, has always remarked that it makes no sense that 500 million Europeans depend upon 330 million Americans to defend them against 150 million Russians.
Right. And we need to be very careful when Trump says that he wants to seize the oil for the United States. In fact, he wants to seize it for himself and his cronies in the oil business. And what you're alluding to is, yes, which is that Trump isn't trying to create prosperity for America itself, but he wants to emulate the Putin model, which is that you have a bunch of boyars around you, or oligarchs to use the contemporary term, who loot and plunder the state for their own benefit. And that's what we're on the brink of in the United States.
But it's already happened, Jacob, with Citgo, which was the Venezuelan retail oil gas stations around the country. Trump's handed them over to one of his billionaire donors.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Silicon Valley dream, of course, which is to have control over the state. And that also explains why Trump has been buying up companies with government money. So, yeah, we are on the road to this fate. We aren't there yet, but Trump has certainly moved aggressively. That's why I still think there's a lot of things we don't know about the Venezuela caper.
Well, what's going to stop this guy? Because, as you mentioned, he's now, at least Politico's reporting, that in 2 months' time, he's going to start construction on this the Arc de Trump, as they call it, at Arlington Cemetery, at which, Trump, given his attitudes to fallen U.S. military, that he should inscribe on it, here lies a bunch of suckers and losers. I mean, this guy has contempt for the very people that he's supposedly going to celebrate with his arcs, which is all about celebrating him, along with his dreadful ballroom financed by his billionaire cronies, which will just distort the White House and be an enduring insult that the worst president in the history of the United States has his imprint on so many buildings and will haunt us and insult us into posterity. So is there anything that can stop this? I mean, I know his edifice complexes pales compared to the fact that he's changing the world in the worst possible way. But still, I feel really worked up over the idea of these edifices insulting us forever.
Well, he reminds me a little bit of Napoleon III, who tried to resurrect the French Empire starting in the 1850s, and ultimately it turned into a vainglorious episode that completely failed. And I don't think we are stuck with these edifices. Any Democratic president worth his salt would tear them down if elected. This is why, again, we get back to these midterm elections are so important. Unless none of Trump's moves appear to be popular with the voters, as far as you can tell from the polling. There just has to be a backlash against him at the polling booth. That's the only thing that can stop him.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, and I thank you for joining us, Jacob.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Jacob Heilbrunn, who's the editor at The National Interest and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and a columnist for The Spectator. His books include They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons, and America Lost, The Right Century-Long Romance with Foreign Dictators, and he's also the editor-at-large of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. We're going to take a brief station break. We're going to look into how Trump is planning to start construction in 2 months on his latest monument to himself, the Arc de Triomphe at Arlington National Cemetery.
But one thing that is certain, life is good at Heilbrunn. If you're really so astute, you should invest in ground and root. Yes. How come you're so wrong? My sweet
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Adele Stan, an independent journalist and a longtime chronicler of the right wing of U.S. politics, a winner of the Heilbrunn Prize in Opinion Analysis Journalism. Her work has appeared in Mother Jones, The Nation, and The American Prospect, as well as the op-ed pages of the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. And her latest article at the New Republic is How Jazz Great Chuck Red Gave American Culture a Gift This Christmas. Welcome to Background Briefing, Adele Stan.
Great to be with you, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And you've written about Richard Grinnell at the Kennedy Center, which is now Trump has renamed the Donald J. Trump Kennedy Center, with a handpicked board approving such a move. But he's on a roll. He's barely begun because he's torn down the East Wing to build a massive ballroom financed by his cronies. And he's just apparently, according to Politico, in 2 months' time, he'll begin construction on the Triumphal Arch at Arlington National Cemetery, which presumably, given Trump's attitude to veterans, will be inscribed, "Here lies the suckers and losers." So, so it's all unbelievable, isn't it, to think the worst president in the history of the United States, this disgraceful man who finally the American people are waking up to, should leave his imprint for posterity.
Well, I mean, hopefully it won't be for posterity as much as it appears to be now. I mean, of course, his imprint on the history of this country is going to be unfortunately profound because of the destruction of so many institutions. The symbolism can be erased, right? I mean, the ballroom can be knocked down and the East Wing restored, and the Trumpian arch can be knocked down. But it's all of these institutions that are being gutted and destroyed that are going to, it's going to take assuming that this right-wing cabal is uprooted from the power structure of the United States, and that's a big assumption. They're, assuming that, we're still going to have just decades and decades and decades of damage to repair.
Well, Let's talk a little bit about your article, and particularly Grinnell, who seems to have gotten the consolation prize as the head of the Kennedy Center. He wanted to be Secretary of State, and Marco Rubio outmaneuvered him. And I assume that had a lot to do with Susie Wiles, the Chief of Staff, since they have a long relationship in Florida going back decades.
Oh, right. I hadn't
Uh,
even considered that. Yeah.
yeah, so that apparently is the case. But now Susie Wiles is being sidelined because Trump was furious at her for her tell-all interview with Chris Whipple and Vanity Fair. And of course, guess who benefits from that? Stephen Miller, the deputy
Yeah, that's right.
chief of staff, who's always had inordinate influence. So I don't understand why we don't all in the press, not that I speak for the press at all, why don't we refer to this administration as the Trump-Miller administration?
That would, at least as a rhetorical device in places where that's permissible, I think that's a really great, I think that's a great suggestion. I think that's really what is going on. But there are also, other players with influence as well. And it's really interesting to see that those levels of influence constantly shifting. Before we go too far from Grinnell, I just wanted to point out to the listenership. So Grinnell is now the president of the Kennedy Center, so appointed by Trump. Um, and he was given this special portfolio also as a consolation prize, which is a special portfolio for special, quote unquote, special missions, right? So this very vague portfolio that would have allowed him to continue to negotiate things as Trump, deemed appropriate. So he gets that special mission thing. Then added to his portfolio is the Kennedy Center. Grinnell is, I think, one of two out gay people in the administration. So I'm sure, Trump was like, "Where's my gay?"
Right.
Somebody
Gay,
needs to run. You like theater. You people like theater. So anyway, he puts Grinnell to head the Kennedy Center, and all the while, Grinnell is really distracted by his special mission thing, and he went to undercut in Venezuela. Like this whole thing is coming full circle. There's a Venezuela component to this because while Grinnell was head of the Kennedy Center, he was also dashing off to Venezuela to undercut Marco Rubio, a hostage deal that Rubio was making for Americans held in Venezuela. And Grinnell runs down there, and in exchange for promising Chevron that they can be released from the ban that Trump has put on exports from Venezuela, he gets one American back. And I mean, and now what are we hearing about? The oil, and Chevron, right? And so, I mean, it's very murky as to like who's doing what where in this administration. But he did go after our friend Chuck Red, and I say our friend in the jazz community in DC. Chuck Red is a beloved figure, and and made all kinds of ridiculous claims.
well, he's suing him for not showing up for the concert for $1 million. And Grinnell is complaining about the dismal ticket sales for the Chuck Red concert. But it was a free concert.
It's a free concert. It's been free for the last 20 something years. That tells you how much Grinnell understands about the Kennedy Center and its traditions, right? Or that he just doesn't care. But I suspect they didn't even know. I suspect they've got like, certain things just running on autopilot because they don't know what to do. And, um, so he's threatening Chuck with this $1 million lawsuit. We'll see if they actually file it, because there were a number of reasons why he may have made this threat on December 26th when he did Grinnell. And one of the things was the Kennedy Center honors had just played on CBS news, right? The first time it was ever hosted by a president, and the president was Trump. And, the acts being honored were like Kiss, and I forget who else. Um, and so he got the lowest ratings. That Kennedy Center Honors show got the lowest ratings it's ever had in its entire existence. So that news is hitting the front page right about the time Rick Grinnell is threatening to threatening a rather somewhat obscure jazz musician with a $1 million suit.
Well, it looks like Rubio effectively sidelined Grinnell with Venezuela, and he's very much close to Trump. I think Trump even recognizes what an idiot Hegseth is, but he seems to rely somewhat on, he's given him two important portfolios. And
Right.
of course, again, that was the work of Susie Wiles, who I think wanted to stop the influence of so-called FaceTime that Stephen Miller has. But that's out the window now. Stephen Miller is definitely the co-president, and Vance is completely irrelevant, which I think, at least because he's such a despicable human being, that I guess we can take some small comfort in that.
Some small comfort indeed. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, how Trumpism survives Trump if it does, because I don't see I don't see Vance being able to carry it. He doesn't have the personality for it, and I don't see any personalities coming up that, could carry that.
Right.
That cult.
Well, even though Grinnell has been sidelined, as you point out, he's still got that portfolio as a special advisor, as does that dreadful Hungarian fascist and Corey Lewandowski. So you can go, his buddies can go in and out of the Oval Office and get all kinds of concessions from Trump.
Right.
I mean, Lewandowski runs DHS, even though his girlfriend, Kristi Noem, is nominally in charge. So
Right.
it's a totally chaotic situation where nobody really knows what's going on. There's no procedure, there's no process, there's no National Security Council anymore. It's all, at the end of the day, comes down to Trump and his whims. And we have the most powerful man in the world who's an absolute ignoramus, a pathological narcissist, and now a total megalomaniac because he's riding so high and drunk with power, thinking he's done something great. But that's how he rolls. He is a reality TV guy, and this
Right.
is all episodes of a reality TV series. There's no follow-on. There's nothing to sustain this. This is not, you don't have a showrunner in the White House. You just have
Right.
this.
And even I'm following you, and I'm thinking, even with the competition between the players in the White House, right? It's like an episode of The Apprentice, right? They're all competing against each other.
Right. But there's no follow-on. If you go back
Right.
to the first regime in 2017 with little Rocket Man, who decided he had a love affair with, there was no follow-on with Kim Jong-un. That was just
Right.
a couple of wasted photo ops. So everything, it looks like Venezuela will be that. He thinks that by just knocking out Maduro, he's achieved something. He thinks that he's ended 8 wars, and he complains that he doesn't already have a Nobel Prize for winning 8 wars. Well, he hasn't won 8 wars and brought about peace because there's no sustaining follow-up to these photo ops that he does. He meets with them once, tells Cambodia and Thailand
In Thailand, right.
that you have a peace deal and it's all over, and then they start shooting each other.
You're right.
It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. And the interesting thing, of course, about Venezuela we'll be hearing a lot about is that he's leaving the regime in place, essentially, the way it looks, right? And,
Well, but they learned at least that lesson from Iraq.
Right,
That you
right.
don't demobilize the entire military and then create a guerrilla force, armed guerrilla force, which is what George W. Bush did with demobilizing the Iraqi military. So,
Yeah, and I also think it remains to be seen how much the the vice president who is now, I don't know if she's yet been sworn in as president of Venezuela, Delcy Ramirez,
Yeah, she has.
whether or not she's been in on the deal, what did she know? I mean, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, she was the head of intelligence at one point. I mean, it's really tough to know how that's all going to work out. And of course, it's all about, the oil.
Well, of course it is, but she initially, in her conversations with Rubio, just after Maduro and his wife had been snatched, she was obviously quite quite accommodating. She didn't want to be snatched.
Right.
And then she goes on national television and gives this fiery
Right.
anti-imperialism speech, but now she sort of swung back the other way. So it's hard to know whether or not they
Well,
can...
I felt like that fiery speech that she gave was really performative. I mean, she has to maintain her own image so she maintains support, with her own base.
Right. Well, but they have to deal with the collectivos. These are the nutcases that they've armed and to intimidate the opposition and wreak havoc. I mean, the country has the highest murder rate in the world. It's a really disastrous place. So I don't know how you can stabilize it. And obviously they don't want to put boots on the ground, and American boots on the ground would certainly not be welcome. That would just add gasoline to the fire. So I'm not sure there's a way out.
Yeah, and I don't see the American people being supportive of boots on the ground in Venezuela. Do you?
No, but I'm saying I don't see a way out of this. Trump's lit the fuse, but I don't know when the explosion's going to happen.
Well, and they're talking about Greenland and Colombia and Mexico, and I mean
Panama, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know, but I do think that circling back to the Trumpian arch and all of that, I think also that in terms of the authoritarianism, the ramshackle authoritarianism, such as it is, it is the attempt to control culture. And although the Kennedy Center is hardly a purveyor of the vast sum of American culture, I do think that there's sort of that authoritarian bent as well. So you've got the expansionism, you've got the attempt to control culture, you've got the censorship, the taking over of media. It's a lot.
Right. Well, at the end of your article, you point out going after the jazz musician Chuck Red. Your last line is, and who really hated jazz? The Nazis.
Right.
Just saying, right?
Yeah. Well, really,
Right. Well, we're going to have the Kennedy Center will become the venue for Kid Rock, right? That's the best that Trump can get.
Yeah, that's right. And Ted Nugent. I mean, like I was talking to a sound recording engineer that I know, and he works with a lot of bands, and he was hearing from, and music people in this town know each other, and he was hearing from people inside the Kennedy Center that Trump wants to put rock bands in there, and my sound guy says, those spaces are not designed for rock to sound good. Like rock is going to sound terrible in those spaces, whether it's the Symphony Hall or the Opera House or whatever.
Right. I didn't realize, Adele, that you are a jazz singer.
I am. In fact, I've just been working on my next EP. And that should be out in a few months. And it's my great love. It's my avocation.
But you're not going to appear at the Kennedy Center, I don't think.
No, but I gotta confess, it's not like I've ever been invited.
Okay. All right. No, the door is definitely closed. Well, I know we're making light of a terrible time, and most of the mail I'm getting, and people are really alarmed and think there's a madness afoot. This guy's nuts. The leader of the free world is a dangerous lunatic who has his finger on the nuclear button. It's not a very comforting situation that we're in.
It's terrifying. I gotta say, it is terrifying. If you're feeling really scared, you're having an appropriate response. The thing is, how do we find our way through this? And it's hard in an era of isolation, right? We tend to be quite isolated from each other. We don't gather in physical spaces very much, which is why places like the Kennedy Center are important, because they are places where people gather in physical spaces. And so I think that I really hope that we can find ways, and that maybe this purportedly liberal billionaires will consider this, that, people of goodwill need physical places to come together in, and a reason to come together in them. So I would like to see that happen.
Well, it's already happened with the No Kings. There have been two rallies. The last one had over 7 million people gathering
Mm,
in places all across the country.
I
So,
mean it. I mean permanent physical structures in communities. And
yeah.
let me tell you, there's more than a few vacant churches, that could maybe be used if there were people willing to put money behind it and create spaces where people could be creative and have their meetings and paint their signs and come together.
Right. But they have to mobilize against this nightmarish regime, right?
Yeah, yes, but without the infrastructure, I argue, without the infrastructure, you can't mobilize as well. You need that infrastructure.
Well, interesting thought, and I thank you for joining us here today, Adele Stan.
Great to be with you, Ian. Thank you.
And again, I've been speaking with Adele Stan, who's an independent journalist and a longtime chronicler of the right wing of U.S. politics, a winner of the Heilbrunn Prize in Opinion Analysis Journalism. Her work has appeared in Mother Jones, The Nation, The American Prospect, as well as on the op-ed pages of the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. And she has an article at the New Republic, How Jazz Great Chuck Red Gave American Culture a Gift This Christmas. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
By 9:30. Who'll ever know how much she loved them so? That dark night alone in America. A quiet voice singing something to me. An angel song about the home of the brave in this land here of the free. One time, one night in America. And the other became a car. A car skidded into the rain, making the last little one to say, one more light goes out in